My wedding ring costs less than my wife's, even though my one is bigger, and they were made at the same place, at the same time, and by the same person. Why is that? Well, simply because Louise's ring has a higher carat rating. Her ring contains more gold than mine does. Now, an object's value is often derived from what it's made of. So let me ask you this question. What are you made of? 99% of the human body comprises just 6 elements: oxygen, hydrogen, nitrogen, carbon, calcium, and phosphorus. If you were to break down all the elements that go into a body and sell them, well, they'd be worth about £15. But of course, our value is infinitely more than this. We're more than the sum of our parts, and we're made of more than what we're made of. However, you don't know what you're made of until you're put under pressure. That's where your character is really put to the test. And that's where you discover who you really are. So throughout this new series, we're going to explore 4 character traits that we have the hope of being made of. And to do so, we're going to drop in on a story from ancient history. We'll look at the example of a guy called Daniel and 3 of his friends, and we're going to explore the pressure that they were put under, which showed what they were made of. And as we do so, we'll be able to see some qualities that hopefully can be true of us also. So let's dive in. One quality we look for in most objects is durability. We want them to last. I remember making some shorts in home ec at school. I was really proud of these shorts and I wanted to show them off at our local outdoor swimming pool. They looked great, but the material that they were made of wasn't great, nor was the quality of my stitching. The fabric went see-through and the seams started to fall apart. Durability is essential, especially if you don't want to be left in a pool waiting for everyone to leave before you can get out. So how durable are you? Is what you're made of durable enough to withstand pressure? Or do you fall apart at the seams when life gets tough? Well, let's take a look at the start of Daniel's story and see how durable he was. The book of Daniel is found in the Old Testament section of the Bible. That's the bit that is pre-Jesus. And Daniel lived in Jerusalem around 600 BC. Jerusalem was in the region of Judea. The nation of Israel had previously split into 2 back in 900 BC. Israel in the north and Judea, or Judah, in the south. And the opening words of the book of Daniel tell us that the king of Babylon, that's Nebuchadnezzar, invaded Jerusalem. They ransacked the temple and they took a bunch of their citizens of Jerusalem back to Babylon with them. And, this was a common tactic of King Neb, who was actually Nebuchadnezzar II. He was considered the greatest king of Babylon. And under his reign, the Babylonian Empire grew to become the dominant force in the Eastern world. They controlled the entire region. And this tactic of invading a country, kidnapping a bunch of its inhabitants and redeploying them in the Babylonian Empire was a crucial part of their success. This is an excerpt from chapter 1 of Daniel. The king ordered Ashpenaz, chief of his court officials, to bring into the king's service some of the Israelites from the royal family and the nobility. Young men without physical defect, handsome, showing aptitude for every kind of learning, well-informed, quick to understand, and qualified to serve in the king's palace. He was to teach them the language and literature of the Babylonians. The king assigned them a daily amount of food and wine from the king's table. They were to be trained for 3 years, and after that, they were to enter the king's service. So Daniel and 3 of his friends were among the people who were taken. And the first thing that's worth noting is that Daniel isn't an average person. He's among the elite, the best of the best. That's why he was handpicked to be trained to serve the king. He wasn't taken off to a dungeon to be tortured. Generally speaking, Daniel was treated well and well looked after. Eating food from the king's table meant he would have been better fed in Babylon than he ever was back in Jerusalem. Now, at face value, this is a promotion. This is a step up. Daniel is climbing the career ladder. Surely this is a good thing for Daniel. Well, let's read on to see what happens. Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the royal food and wine, and he asked the chief official for permission not to defile himself this way. But the official told Daniel, "I'm afraid of my lord the king, who has assigned your food and drink. Why should he see you looking worse than the other young men your age? The king would then have my head because of you." See, Daniel didn't want the fancy food, not because he didn't like it, but because of what it represented. To eat this food would mean that Daniel's allegiance switched to King Neb. It would mean that he accepted Neb as his new ruler, his new king, and along with everyone else, his new God. This was a step too far for Daniel. His loyalty and faithfulness lay with Jerusalem and his God, Yahweh, the one true God. The chief official liked Daniel, but he wasn't willing to accept his request. He was worried that Neb would punish him if Daniel wasn't well fed. And Daniel's response is full of wisdom, and it gives us a glimpse of what he's made of. This is why he was one of the people selected for this position. "Please test your servants for 10 days. Give us nothing but vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then compare our appearance with that of the young men who eat the royal food. And treat your servants in accordance with what you see." So he agreed to this and tested them for 10 days. And at the end of the 10 days, they looked healthier and better nourished than any of the young men who ate the royal food. So the guard took away their choice food and the wine that they were to drink and gave them vegetables instead. There's such wisdom and faith in this plan. The wisdom is found in the suggestion, giving the official the chance to test him so he can see that he won't be worse off because of it. And the faith is found in trusting God so that he won't be worse off for it. We know today that there are actual health benefits in eating more vegetables instead of lots of red meat and processed food. And it's better to drink water than wine. But this wasn't necessarily the case in the ancient world. The food on Neb's table wasn't deep fried or full of preservatives or additives. There's no added colouring or E-numbers. It was completely organic. And drinking wine was actually better for you than water. Wine wasn't overly alcoholic, and drinking too much, well, yeah, it could get you drunk, but drinking water could kill you because of the high levels of bacteria that it often contained. The alcohol in the wine helped to kill off the bacteria, making it a safer option. So, it's debatable whether Daniel's diet had any health benefits over Neb's. At that time, they certainly thought it would be worse for you. But even if the Daniel plan was a better option, it would take more than 10 days for the effects to be noticeable. The reason it had such an impact was because God blessed them. He honoured their faith and their obedience. And Daniel and his friends thrived. And at the end of their training, they were better than any of their counterparts. They were brought into the king's service and were invaluable to him. It says that in every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king questioned them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters in his whole kingdom. So Daniel stayed in the service of King Neb and Babylon for many years, increasing in influence and prominence. In fact, Daniel outlasted King Neb. He outlasted his son and his grandson right through till the end of the Babylonian Empire, when it fell to the Persians under the reign of King Cyrus. Whatever Daniel was made of, it was undoubtedly durable. And it might seem that Daniel's experience is a million miles away from yours. The things he faced are completely different to what you face. What can we take from his story to help us? It would have been easy for Daniel to lose faith or compromise his faith in this new environment that he found himself in. He easily could have assimilated to adopt the customs or the principles of the people around him. But he didn't. His faith was durable and distinctive. We often find ourselves in situations where it's easy for us to blend in rather than stand out. If you're a follower of Jesus, it's not uncommon to be in a situation that could lead to us compromising our faith. So what was Daniel's secret? How did he cope with the pressure of his situation and not only survive, but thrive? Well, let me highlight 3 things that I see at work in Daniel's life that repeat itself throughout his story. Firstly, Daniel knew who God was and who he was, so he knew what his values were. Gods in the ancient world were regional. You followed and worshipped the God of the region you lived in. It's a bit like supporting a football team. Daniel was taken from his hometown and dumped in a strange land with strange gods. Yet amidst all this, he still knew that God was God, that Yahweh was the one true God. Daniel knew that he was a servant of God, that his identity and his value were found in his God, not his location. So he chose to honor God and depend on him rather than this new king who thought he was a god that was before him. Secondly, Daniel had a group of friends around him. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were also carried off to Babylon with Daniel. And their presence is implied in the text of this experience. They were with Daniel in his choice not to eat from the king's table. They were with him when he was called into the king's service. These friends were a source of strength and support for each other. They would have been able to help each other keep going when they felt like giving up. And thirdly, Daniel had the courage to act on his faith. His belief in God wasn't just something in his head. His values weren't just empty words, they had legs. Daniel was willing to stand on his faith and follow it, even when the consequences could be severe. His faith wasn't easy. It stretched him at times. It pushed him to his limits. Yet each time he acted on his faith. Each time his faith was tested, it grew. This is what Daniel was made of, and it resulted in him being durable. It resulted in him not only being able to survive the pressure he found himself in, but thrive in it. And you know what? You can do the same. You can learn from Daniel and apply these principles to your life. You don't have to have faith to benefit from them. Know who you are and what you stand for. Define your values before you find yourself in a sticky situation. Invest in a group of friends who have your back and for whom you do the same. And have the courage of your convictions, the courage to stand up for what you believe in and act on it. Those principles are sound and will serve you well. However, they're only as good as they are. Your values are only as good as your values. Your convictions are only as good as your convictions. Daniel's values were not limited to him. His convictions were not limited to him. They were built on ancient and timeless principles. They were built on his faith in God. I believe something amazing and life-changing happens when we allow our principles to line up with God's. When we choose to follow him instead of ourselves. That's precisely what Daniel did. And that's why what he was made of had the power to last. These three things neatly align with the three things we do to grow our faith. That's no surprise. They're based on these timeless principles that we see throughout stories like Daniel's, that we find time and time again throughout the Bible. And we see them in countless examples of people who choose to trust in God and follow him. If you want to know who God is and who you are, then you need to embrace personal disciplines. You need a bunch of healthy habits that constantly remind you and reinforce to you who God is and what he says about you. Reading the Bible and prayer are the most common disciplines, though giving and fasting, that's going without things like food for a set period of time, also help to do the same. We call them personal disciplines because they are precisely that. They're things we have to do for ourselves, and we have to do them consistently. Sometimes you don't feel like praying or seeking God in the pages of Scripture, especially when life is tough. But embracing those disciplines constantly and consistently will help remind you of who God is and who you are in reference to him. And whilst faith is personal, it isn't private. It isn't just about God and me, it's God and us. Intentional community is all about having a group of people around us who can pour into us, who can support us and encourage us, who can cheer us on and pick us up when we're down, and who can honestly and openly challenge us when we need it. And of course, it's about having a group of people for whom we can do the same. This sort of community doesn't happen automatically. That's why we call it intentional community. It isn't rocket science. It takes time and willingness to be vulnerable, to be real and honest. But over time, strong relationships are formed. I've recently gone through a bit of a challenge where I needed help from my friends. And there wasn't anything they could practically do apart from pray for us and encourage us. But just being able to ask for that help was a great help. When we have this sort of community, it helps us to have an active faith. It enables us to step out of our comfort zone, to push the boundaries and actively follow where we believe Jesus is leading us. Daniel's active faith in God caused him to stand up for what he believed in. It helped him trust in God and actively follow him. You know, an active faith isn't just about doing stuff, it's about doing the right stuff. Reading through the Bible is so important because, it not only helps us to gain a great understanding of who God is, but it also helps us to discover more about what it means to follow Jesus. Embracing personal disciplines is crucial, but only if you have an active faith. It doesn't really matter what you read or how you pray if you don't act on them. Daniel embraced personal disciplines. He cultivated intentional community and he stepped out in active faith. We can do this too. When we allow these things to be the basis of what we're made of, we will discover that we grow. Our faith grows and our life experience grows. These things won't cause us not to face hardships or struggles, nor won't cause those struggles or challenges to be easy. But they will help us through them. They will help us be made of something that lasts, something that takes whatever is thrown at us and uses it to help us grow. So what are you made of?